it's arguably some of the most touching music for the modern listener. You know, it really reaches us very, very deeply and continues to do so. Beethoven, in essence, is giving the audience a chance to experience the piece in a more direct context. And I think it's very important to remember that for Beethoven, the idea of the piano concerto was still supposed to be a genre that was presented in a very intimate setting. And in fact, his student Czerny says that it's a nightmare to play piano concertos in large spaces because the balance is never right. And I've been thinking about that a lot, because what it means, I think, is that Beethoven is trying to present something like the Fourth Piano Concerto to the listener in this small room, very resonant acoustic, and he wants them to be able to really enjoy the piece literally up close. And that's a very different aesthetic from what he imagines for the Ninth Symphony, for example. So I think one has to temper a lot of the details of the balance in a piece like this when there's only one violin playing the main line. That means that in places you have to sort of say to the horns and trumpets and timpani, play a bit less here. Also to the winds, indeed, because they have a certain mass of sound and density of sound, and I think Beethoven very strongly programs the sound of the orchestra to work side by side. So he wants 6 violins on the first part to be able to kind of combat the pure amount of sound that the winds and trumpets and timpani are making. So you have a whole new experience of the balance where you've got a kind of string quintet, maybe string sextet, plus all the regular winds. And that, of course, is a totally new way of hearing the texture of Beethoven's writing for orchestra in this kind of essentially one and a part setup. I think it's fascinating and allows us to hear a lot of new textural details in very clear, vivid ways that you never do in a full orchestral context. The concept in the minds of people like Beethoven and Mozart of a large organism, the orchestra, plus a piano, a kind of symphony with piano obbligato, and the piano is darting in and out of the texture, sometimes very much in the background, sometimes very much at the foreground, and the spotlight is shifting constantly. And in this context, with one and a part strings and the winds, the listener has the chance to kind of chart the territory more vividly. It's a little bit like, I don't know, it's like a small camera just focusing in on certain details, and by virtue of the fact that those details are played by one person, they have a more speech-like intensity to them. I think it works terrifically well. And I think it happens to be very much to Beethoven's advantage that he's kind of coming of age at a time when the artist, the solo composer artist is coming to the fore as a kind of person to be revered. And it just happens to be that in the years before Beethoven, people like Mozart and Haydn are just on the cusp of breaking through that kind of level of expectation, but that just doesn't happen. And Beethoven is right at that time when writing music starts to become an emblem of genius in and of itself. It doesn't have to be that you're a brilliant pianoforte player anymore in the same way that Mozart was. Beethoven is a difficult person, has a very high idea of himself, just like Mozart, and that makes him a kind of fractious person to be involved with. But a colleague of mine said it once so beautifully. I think there's such a deep sense of honor and nobility that shines through in Beethoven's music, a kind of profound sense of the human in all of us, and the human struggle, and also reflections and meditations on spirituality and the divine, and what it means to be a human in the world, and what it means to be a person alone, struggling by oneself, versus the idea of fraternité and all these ideas of brotherhood and sharing that become so important at the beginning of the 19th century. And Beethoven is really the person who shows that most vividly, and it also happens to just coincide with kind of seismic shifts in what's possible musically. I mean, if you look at the symphonies or the piano concertos or the piano sonatas, the string quartets, these kind of game-changing leaps in aesthetic possibilities on Beethoven's part. And at the end of the day, the enormous demands he puts on us as musicians, they're, I think, profoundly moving to both performers and players alike, and it's why it's arguably some of the most touching music for the modern listener. It really reaches us very, very deeply and continues to do so. You come back to any of these pieces and with just renewed respect all the time for the sheer level of audacity and kind of chutzpah. It's just extraordinary, really.